3 o'clock on this Monday afternoon. Welcome aboard the Postgame Show alongside Elijah Campbell. I'm Jay Phillips. It's June, y'all. We're racing right along through 2024. A lot to get to on today's program. By now, most of you across Gamecock Nation and beyond have heard the big local story, but if for whatever reasons you have just finally tuned into some sports talk radio today, Mark Kingston, the 7-year South Carolina baseball coach, was relieved of his duties this morning around 10:45, 11 o'clock. Came a little more quickly than we might have anticipated. I don't think the decision was in any way surprising. It's disappointing for a lot of people. I feel for Mark and his family and the staff. They'll have to go, find other work. Mark will get a buyout of just under $500,000, so he'll be all right in the short term. I get it, but it's still, difficult. You never wish this upon anyone. That's why I said in a tweet earlier, I don't know that this is the time for celebration, and there's still a lot of unknown around here. This is a proud baseball program. This is a program that's been to the College World Series a bunch of times, but hasn't been in a dozen years. You played for 6 national championships. You've won 2 of them. Put a lot of dudes in the bigs of late. And now you're in the middle of the pack in the mightiest conference in the land. And, oh, by the way, perhaps the most storied or one of the 2 or 3 most storied programs in the history of college baseball is about to enter into your league. Their in-state rival is in the Supers this weekend. Talking about Texas and Texas A&M, of course. Oklahoma is very good. Carolina saw Oklahoma on the road to their first national championship back in 2010. Remember the Lightning game? Nah, don't worry about that, Lightning kids, and your metal bats as conductors. It's fine. We have to get this game in.
That's more important than what the worst-case scenario is.
Anyway, I'm not at all surprised. I had somebody, and I'll say it. I don't care. I deal with all kinds of people all the time in my career. Been doing this a long time, but I dealt with a smart ass "I told you so" guy earlier today. No, there's no "I told you so." This team was not horrible. This team, a couple of years ago, Mark didn't make the playoffs. A few years back, Chad didn't make the playoffs a couple of times. That's what's horrible around here. This team was, until 3 weeks ago, this team was headed toward a top 16 seed and hosting in the NCAA tournament. And as we all know, the wheels fell off. You put them back on a little bit in Hoover, and then it just ran out of gas, if you will, to stay with some type of vehicular analogy this weekend in Raleigh. I actually thought you pitched okay relative to recent expectation and production levels, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the bullpen pitched exceptional compared to what it was when we're talking about what the worst of the worst was this year with the Georgia and Tennessee series. Pitching puts you in a position to win. I don't know if you could ask much more from your pitching staff than what you actually got.
Certainly not yesterday, man. Certainly not yesterday.
Hey, we talk about facts on this show, Jay. We're good at dishing out the facts. How many teams would you guess have ever won a game in the history of college baseball without scoring a run? Our crack staff back here just did the research. We have the number. We have the number right now. How many teams have ever won a game without scoring a run?
I'm going to say it's less than 1.
You would be correct.
Yes.
That number is 0. Can't win if you don't score. It's exactly what happened against a team that has an ERA of over 6.
Yeah.
Unacceptable.
I felt like when Petrie hit the double, I forget which inning it was starting off, 5th, 6th.
I actually have it up here.
It's fine. Whatever. It doesn't matter. But he,
6, top of the 6.
Yeah, top of the 6, hits the double, gets to 3rd, nobody out, and JMU got out of the jam. And I felt like at that point, like, man, you know what? This just ain't happening. I mean, it's not like I'm predicting it per se, but you just like this. It's done. Mm-hmm. It's done. And not trying to take a shot at the hitter himself, but Will Tippett ends the game on a called 3rd strike. And it's just like that sort of summed a lot of things up. Again, it's not about Will directly. It's about the team. We had Coach Lake on a couple of times this year talking about called 3rd strikes and, that it seemed to plague this team. And look, at the end of a ball game like that, when I say you're swinging at everything, I'm not necessarily you got to. And look, I realize that guys like Wade Boggs and Tony Gwynn or almost hitting freaks of nature.
Hall of Famers.
But how many times did they swing their bat not to get a hit, but to simply stay alive at the plate? And something like that has to be in the consciousness of any baseball player. I can't get out here, and I certainly can't get out with the bat on my bleeping shoulder. And it's just something that seemed to happen a little too often for this ball club. And where is the difference? Where's the balance between what players are supposed to do? Because we've talked about it. Coaches can't get out there and swing the bat, throw the ball, catch the ball, field the ball, etc. But there is also a level of preparedness and the things that coaches are supposed to do at any level. Even the greatest in the bigs, Joe Torre, Bobby Cox, Whitey Herzog, et al. At some point, hey guys, I need you to pay attention to what's going on here. Okay, I can't just let you go out there and do whatever the hell you feel like. So to come back around, this decision is not at all surprising. There's no I told you so here from whatever faction of fans that feels like, well, we finally got what we wanted. What you have right now is a vacancy at a really interesting time. You've been past South Carolina baseball, not by Florida was already really good. Vanderbilt was already really good. Arkansas was already really good. LSU was already really good. You've been passed by two schools that a few years ago didn't give a you-know-what about baseball in Kentucky and Tennessee. You've been passed. Tennessee's about to lap the field with a lot of people with what Vitello's doing.
Georgia, too. Let's throw Georgia in there.
Coach Jones is doing a fantastic job. You and I were talking. This was a man who just a few years ago was doing well as a pitching coach in Major League Baseball and decided to give it up. He likes this life better. And if Georgia decides that they want to stay interested in baseball,
they'll make it worth his while.
Yeah. And again, I don't have to tell any of y'all, Metro Atlanta alone will produce more than enough talent to keep the Georgia Bulldogs fielding a very good baseball team for many, many years to come if Georgia chooses to stay with it. Georgia, it's interesting. Georgia seems to kind of ebb and flow with their interest levels in baseball. We know what rules the campus in Athens. It rules most campuses across the Southeastern Conference. But Georgia, the state of, I'm talking now, has more than enough talent for every team on that campus to be really good. It's just that sometimes other teams on that campus are like, oh, we can't compete with football. But that's another story for another day. But South Carolina's being passed. The two Mississippis have won national championships since you. It's not surprising that Florida and LSU played for last year's national title. They're very, very good. But this time around, what are you going to do about it? Listen, I'm not here to rewrite history. I liked the Chad Holbrook hire. I've said this before. I think the one thing that Chad needed on his staff, especially in the later years, was someone like Chad. Chad didn't have a Chad the way Chad helped Ray. And that's not knocking Coach Tanner. Coach Tanner's had a multitude of fantastic assistants through his career. But Chad really kind of pushed him up just one more little notch. And guess what that notch level was, man? Title winning. Chad was a hell of a recruiter. But I'm not here to say you go get Chad back. That's not where I'm going with this. My point is, if Chad had maybe an administrative coach so Chad could hit the road more often, are things different? But it was still, nevertheless, a roll of the dice for someone who'd never been a head coach. Mark Kingston had been a head coach, but at smaller levels with good success. And he had come up as a player at North Carolina and had been a part of some fantastic programs and teams at the University of Miami. So Mark knew big-time baseball. But to some degree, it was still a roll of the dice. Well, this time around, you can't do that. Not in my opinion.
Nope.
You cannot do that. Now, Mark makes $700,000. They're going to pay him $400 to walk away. I don't know necessarily what – I'm not saying that you must start your search with coaches that are going to demand seven figures. But I don't think that you can go out and roll the dice again this time around. The best coaches in the country now are making over $1 million. The very best might be approaching $2 million. And that's what you Gamecock fans want in your program. You want to get back to a level that you had under the heydays of Ray Tanner from 2000 to 2012. And I get it. And I think they want that too. But you got to pay for it. There's no middle ground here. There's no getting it done. I'm not going to say on the cheap because Carolina spends a lot of money on baseball. But I don't know that you can have the same levels and hope for that next level of success. And again, you've been passed by Tennessee and Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a concern. I had somebody hit me the other day asking me about that. I was like, man, I don't know if Kentucky knew they had a baseball team a few years ago. And now they're back-to-back supers. Tennessee, you can make a case for being the best program in the country. They need to go win a title to back that up. But they've won 50 games again.
And they've got, like, if they go to the College World Series this year, that's 3 times that Vitello's taken them to the College World Series. They haven't gone 3 times in, a collective 5-year span since before I was born.
I think Helton went once, and I think Tennessee went the year after, like 05 maybe?
05,
yeah. And then for a while, Tennessee was like, baseball, whatever.
Yeah, it was an afterthought.
And then a couple of years ago, Tennessee fans thought they had actually invented baseball, and that's why everybody hated them when they played Notre Dame. That was kind of funny. But no, so, here we are. So I don't know that this is a day to celebrate. I don't think you should ever celebrate someone being fired, especially, a team that did get, despite all of its issues and limitations, you did get to the playoffs. And again, just win 2 times in 6 games at the end of the regular season. And you're hosting in the playoffs. And maybe things are very, very different. But that didn't happen. And so here we are. Elijah's got some things we've been digging on. I've got some names that I've been hearing. I know David Cloninger, John Whittle, and a lot of others have been digging in on this. DC is going to join Elijah and me coming up in about 15, 20 minutes. It'll be quick because David's got a lot of work to do, but we'll get into a few things. If you haven't heard, Monty Lee has been named the interim coach because you got to have somebody in the chair. What that means long term, I do not know. We'll get into that for you. We'll follow what's going on. There are 5 games today that are do or die to get to the Supers. Speaking of the number 5, there are 5 SEC schools that are already done. I know Carolina fans feel like crap, but the fan base that feels the worst right now is certainly Arkansas, who wasn't
OVC.
Man, that wasn't supposed to happen.
We do a drive around the OVC today. I know a good topic we can talk about.
That wasn't supposed to happen. Vandy just didn't show up in Clemson.
My God, Coastal took a 9-iron to their skull. That was a bludgeoning on Friday, and then blowing the game to High Point of all teams. Which High Point, you want to talk about the team that that didn't win any, I guess, big games like that. Or they did beat Vanderbilt, but they almost beat Clemson.
Yeah.
That's a cardiac arrest type team right there.
Yeah.
They scared everybody they played.
But Eric Bakich got the Tigers through to the Super Regionals up in Clemson, so they're excited. LSU and North Carolina play in a do-or-die game today. Florida is playing Oklahoma State in a do-or-die game today. Vandy, Bama, Arkansas, Carolina, Mississippi State all done in the first weekend of the NCAA tournament with Tennessee, Kentucky, A&M, and Georgia on to the Supers. Want to hear from you on the phone line, on the text line, your thoughts on this, who you'd like to see next, at least what type of coach. I know Elijah has a poll question. We'll get to that on the other side as well. And David Cloninger with his thoughts coming up at 3:30 or so. You are listening to the Monday afternoon postgame show.
I think every program in the country wants to keep getting better. We're no different. The SEC is filled with teams that are dumping huge resources in, and I think it's just a matter of we need to continue to, do everything we can to try to give this program what it needs to be successful. There's so many parts of our program that are in great shape. But obviously we need to keep getting better, bottom line.
Mark Kingston yesterday after the 2-0 loss that ended South Carolina's season this morning, again, around 10:45, 11 o'clock, Mark was relieved of his duties by Athletics Director Ray Tanner. The search is on. Monty Lee has been named interim head coach for the Gamecocks. David Cloninger will be joining us in just a little bit with more. Welcome back in alongside Elijah Campbell. I'm Jay Phillips. One of the things in that cut that I wanted to highlight, and I had you play it on purpose, Elijah, dumping huge resources. This isn't just going to be about how much you pay your head coach and his staff. What else? You know, Coach Tanner's very proud of what he calls that baseball facility. But where does it rank now in the Southeastern Conference? Where can you enhance it? You know, we can play semantics with the words improvement and enhancement. Had somebody who's very well connected to the university today hit me up and say, you probably need, a minimum $5 or $6 million in improvements. I heard more like 10 or 12. So like double that.
So like the facilities or the resources they have for things like information, because they have, I think going into this past year, I guess brought in some new technology that
some of those things
helps out a little bit. But I mean, if you're still 10 to 12 million behind that, it makes you wonder what the rest of
and I don't know. I mean, look, I don't know. Again, I have that range. Let's say it's anywhere from 5 to 12 million. All right, let's go to the middle at 8 or 9 even. That's a lot of money. In addition to paying someone that you're going to bring in, I think you will. 1.2 to 1.5 is probably now the neighborhood you need to live in. Again, you're just fired head coach was making $700 and you're paying him $400 to leave. Don't know what the numbers are for the other coaches on staff in terms of total amount of contractual obligation from Carolina to those staff members. I'm sure there are mitigating factors if they go get other jobs and things like that, Mark included. By the way, for what it's worth, Kendall Rogers has already reported today, Kendall of D1 Baseball, that Mark is likely to be right back in the mix for his old job at USF, which is open. Mm-hmm. Never know. It's the so-called investment back into the program. Again, I don't think you can expect this program to be back amongst the elite of the elite if you aren't treating it as such. And I'm not saying they won't. I'm not even saying they aren't. But you hear Mark say that, and he's right. And, Tennessee will keep spending on baseball. Tony Vitello ain't going anywhere.
No. He's got pretty ultimate job security right now.
I've had some fans say, well, they make a run at a guy like that, and come to a quote, baseball school. Well, I think he might have helped Tennessee turn that corner. Mm-hmm. And if Tennessee has to pay Tony Vitello $2 million a year to keep him and provide some upgrades to Lindsey Nelson,
they'll overpay.
Yeah. Tennessee will have zero issue doing that. Coach Mangione up in Lexington could be a little bit of a different story, but they've upgraded their ballpark. Mm-hmm. He's got them, again, in back-to-back supers. Who do they have coming in? Do we know yet?
Who Kentucky has coming in? I don't think so.
I'll double check that.
Check that because there's still obviously some pending.
See what they're, but I mean, if Kentucky and Tennessee make the College World Series, you're kind of up against it around here. There's a lot more than just, and that's why I said earlier today, there's a lot more than just firing the coach to get back to where you want to be. It's going to take a lot this time around because the conference was already great when Carolina was at its greatest. The conference is now greater as you've slid backward. So to play catch up, you're probably going to have to, dare I say, overpay a little bit here and there, when you're looking at the near-term future.
Well, here's the thing. You're more than likely going to have to overpay because of what the coaching market is right now anyway. You're not going to get somebody for what you were paying Mark to be able to get you results better than Mark. It would take a diamond in the rough to be able to do that, quite frankly, and that's a big gamble. And where you're at in your program's history, at this moment in time, in 2024, you cannot afford to flop this higher. You can't, because like we've mentioned before, every program around you is getting better. You're bringing in two juggernauts. The last thing you need to do is go through a couple of years of being Missouri and Auburn, because you might not recover from that. Mm-hmm. Because by that point, you think you might be a little behind now. Think about what missing the SEC tournament in a year or two from now will put you.
Right.
Even further behind. And what looks like an uphill climb will make it a steeper uphill climb. And the championships and the Omaha appearances are going to be further and further in the rearview mirror. Like, this is a very important hire, and I think this is one that you absolutely should overpay when it comes to what the market demands if you're serious about getting back to where you were.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. If you're serious about it and you really want to get back to that spot, you are going to have to give a Godfather offer, to use one of your favorite movies, a reference, give a Godfather offer, something that they can't refuse to a certain few candidates to pull them away from what are already really good jobs. Not saying in terms of like athletic departments, you can't outbid. It's not happening at University of Tennessee, maybe Kentucky, but there are certainly some places where you have the capability to do it. You just got to make the call and show that you're serious about doing that and making it some of these coaches that we're going to be talking about later worth their while to be able to leave their jobs, which are solid jobs and well-paying jobs, because some of the coaches we're going to be talking about later in the show are making north of $1.1 million.
Yeah.
That's more than $700,000 if my math is correct.
Yes, it is.
So you're going to have to overshoot the market to get a coach that can get you to Omaha, that has at least proven they can get somebody to Omaha, if you consider yourself to be a serious College World Series contending baseball school year in and year out.
I agree 100%. And like I said, too, I think then when those coaches may come down over the course of the next few days and tour the facility, where will they look and see,
what do they recommend? Because you're going to have to take the recommendations seriously if you want to land them.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, that's why I say it's not just paying that man and his staff. There will be more involved. What's the recruiting budget look like? And speaking of the recruiting, to one of the points you just made about, being further and further left behind, the kids that you're recruiting now, even taking into account seniors in the transfer portal, were, let's say, between 10 and 5 the last time you were in the College World Series.
Yeah.
So
they don't remember that.
Yeah, to fans, they remember, but to the players being recruited, it's a what have you done for me lately kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
And that makes it, I'm not saying you can certainly overcome it. Look, Carolina from 1985 to 02, Ray certainly had a national championship caliber team in 2000. They didn't make it. 01 wasn't quite as good, but they were pretty good. 02, you played for the national title, but it took 17 seasons to get back to the College World Series. It's going to be 13 if you make it next year. And that's a big if now that you're in a transition phase. So I wouldn't expect it next year. You always expect to make the tournament at this school. And I won't let go, by the way, of hosting as an expectation.
I think that's still, to this day, a very fair expectation for a program that has this history and resources. Yeah.
All right, David Cloninger on the other side. How this went down. David's got a list of candidates. We've got our list of candidates. We'll let DC go first. He's been doing a lot of hard and heavy lifting on this story, so he'll join us coming up with the latest as we continue talking about the fallout after Mark Kingston was fired this morning and what's next for South Carolina baseball. This is the Postgame Show. Welcome back in. Talking Carolina baseball. Mark Kingston fired this morning around 11 o'clock by Coach Ray Tanner. The search is on for Mark's replacement at a time when the Southeastern Conference has set a record by sending 11 schools to the NCAA tournament. And, oh, by the way, Oklahoma and Texas coming in. Both of them made the NCAA tournament this season. Our good friend David Cloninger was busy, like our own Elijah Campbell up in Raleigh this weekend. And DC, always appreciate you. I know you're busy, so we're going to keep you for just a few minutes today. You asked Mark yesterday in postgame if he felt like he was being supported. The answer was not necessarily evasive, but maybe not the answer you were looking for. What signal did that send you and everybody else yesterday afternoon?
Well, guys, I think we all knew this was coming. That's why I asked it. I mean, you're never going to ask a coach, or do you think you're going to be back next year? Because what are they going to say? Yeah, of course I think I'm going to be back. You just have to ask if he thinks he's lost the support of the administration, which the way that they worded that contract extension last year, you knew that there was some shaky ground there. So that's why I asked it to get it on the record. It's I'll go and say, yeah, I mean, we all knew it was coming if they didn't get out of the regionals. So, I asked, he answered, put it in the story, and, less than, 18 hours, 14 hours later, it was done. So glad they went ahead and got it done, didn't drag it out any, because Mark deserved better than that to just be twisted in the wind. But we all knew that this was coming and that this had to happen. The results just were not there.
And David, I mean, you and I have discussed, I guess what the expectations for this program are and maybe what the next steps forward are as well. But when you just look at, the Kingston era where this program is right now, and Jay and I earlier in the hour have talked a lot about how other teams in the SEC have kind of just surpassed you in just the last 3 or 4 years alone. How would you assess where this Gamecock program is right now in terms of maybe facilities, funding, and everything compared to their SEC peers, and including the 2 peers that are coming into the conference that also have rich baseball tradition and history?
Well, Elijah, overall, South Carolina's a top 20 job. The history, the winning dictates that it be so, and it still is. Now, are they as relevant as they once were? No. Are they feared and respected as they once were? No. It's been kind of average at best, at least according to past precedent. When Founders Park was built, it was a jewel. Now it's, it's kind of like, well, it's still maybe middle of the pack, but just other schools in the conference have built theirs up to where they passed Founders Park. So it's another discussion for, do you have to build up the park to get recruits? I don't think you're necessarily at that point. But put it this way, guys, this team was much more talented than the results showed this year. And that's been the case for a lot of the past few years. Now, not the second year. The second year was a disaster that we all knew was coming, and it happened. But since then, it's been pretty good. So it's still a desirable job. They're not going to have any shortage of candidates. They just got to go out and find the right one. They've got to find somebody who can work in this new space that we have for recruiting and all that, and then go out there and get it done on the field.
And let's go there, David. Let's start with the news that Monty Lee will be the interim head coach for South Carolina. I'm sure you have. I know we have here at the station over the years. Well, Monty's there because Ray wants him to take over for Mark. Where do we stand on that particular storyline?
I would not expect Monty to be the next head coach at South Carolina. I would expect him to be the next head coach at another in-state school on a smaller level. This has been communicated to me and to our office that he really wants another open job right now that's in the state. But with South Carolina, and I should say South Carolina has already been lobbying on his behalf to this other school. So when you put that all together, say, look, I love Monty to death, but it's a case of like, well, you never know. I mean, he's a great assistant coach, but if he's going to be a head coach again, I don't think it will be at South Carolina. So it's an interim head coach to bridge the gap, but it won't go any further than that.
All right. Then let's get into who you're looking at. I don't know if you want to rank them, if you want to do it alphabetically, if you want to do it by gut, but who's on the top of the David Cloninger coaching search list?
Well, see, now you guys are asking me who I prefer, and if you ask me who I prefer, I'm like, J. David Cloninger. I guarantee you this team will win under my leadership, but, we can't go there. But guys that I know that will be discussed and that are held in high esteem by the South Carolina brass: Tom Walter at Wake Forest, Chris Pollard at Duke, Skylar Meade at Troy, Dan McDonnell at Louisville. That's just a few of the names that I think kind of pass the quote-unquote eye test, as in they're established, they know what they're doing, they've got some familiarity here. But there's also guys that's like, these are guys that will say yes. Now, I know that Landon Powell is a popular name. Love Landon to death. But it's a case of, and I put it out this morning, so I can put it out again now, just be honest with yourself. If you're one of the guys trumpeting Landon, if he wasn't a Gamecock, would you care what the coach at North Greenville is doing? You just have to ask yourself that. I love Landon. I do. And if he wants to come here as a hitting coach or something, fine. Awesome. Great. Love to have you. But D2 to the SEC, the point is that not that he couldn't succeed. You got to hit a home run this time. You failed on 2 straight hires after this program was at the very top of the sport. You have to have a grand slam home run this time. You can't take any risks. And a D2 coach to the SEC, no matter if he's an alum or not, is a risk. Now, he might get contacted, but I don't expect that to happen.
Talking to David Cloninger of the Post and Courier. Gamecocks have parted ways with Mark Kingston this morning. So, you just mentioned you gotta do this right now, David. And to go back to part of what Elijah just asked you, about where Carolina is with spending, there's always limitations, even for the mightiest departments in the country. Ohio State, Texas, Florida, schools like that. Nobody's pockets are just endless. But where is Carolina right now? I mean, if you have to double the pay of the head coach, for instance, that means you're probably going to also come close to doubling the pay of a staff. And you mentioned Founders is going to need some upgrades. We're talking about a pretty significant financial hit or investment, depending on how you look at it.
Well, guys, it is a case of like these are the realities and these are what you want. If you want to have a winning program for what you're spending now, I don't know if that's feasible. The fact is that the game has changed all across college athletics. Revenue sharing is coming in, and you're going to have to decide for what sports you want to invest in to get more money coming into the program and what sports can fall by the wayside. I can tell you now with full authority that South Carolina will never be one that just says, well, let's scale back baseball. Baseball is what South Carolina has done consistently. Even, when football was not so good, when men's basketball was not so good, the programs that make money, baseball was the one you could rely on. They're not going to give that up. I know it's been 12 years since they last got to the College World Series, but they're not going to give up what South Carolina baseball has built a reputation as being, which is a great, consistent winner. It's taken a hit over the past 12 years, but it's not destitute by any stretch of the imagination. So I realize it's one of those things. Well, you just got to give more money, to which I also realize there's a limit to that well. If you're going to give football, basketball, just, how many times can you keep asking the same folks to give their hard-earned money? So it's a case of like, I wish I could have a, definite answer for you, but you just got to find a way. You got to find a way to get that money into the program and say, whatever you need, you're going to do it. And if that's stadium improvements, if that's NIL money, you just got to go find a way. I mean, this program's greatest perks was built on the phrase of win anyway, right?
Yep.
Now for all the boosters who want to have the baseball program they had, you got to give anyway. It's that simple. I mean, the game has changed, and it's not just good enough to go out and recruiting anymore.
Mm-hmm. And David, I know some of the other coaches that you mentioned, the short list, and all those guys would be home run hires. But of course, a couple of them, like Tom Walter over at Wake Forest, Coach McDonald at Louisville, still at really good schools and really good conferences. What type of things do you think it would take to be able to pry somebody from a job like that? Because when you're taking somebody, coaches who've been to the CWS, it's going to have to take maybe more than just the money and the resources that you just alluded to.
Sometimes. Nobody wants to take a decrease in pay to come down. But if it's maybe just a slight decrease to, say, get you into a better situation where the administration supports baseball, then Dan McDonnell would make a lot of sense. Tom Walter just got a contract extension last year after he led the Demon Deacons to a College World Series. Yeah, well, maybe that buyout's going to be a little too much, but he's a guy that wants the job, and maybe that could be worked around. So there's all kinds of, advantages and disadvantages to every guy that you would want to hire, but there's enough candidates that are the quote-unquote home run hires on this list that you'll be okay. The main thing that you can't do is just say, we're going to settle. I can say right now that there's probably 4 guys on this list, 4, that will say yes. All you got to do is make a phone call. But all 4 of them are like, but do you really want that guy? So you just have to see where they look and how that they're going to do with financial advantages or burdens and go from there. But, there's a lot of guys that will say yes to this job.
Y'all make sure you're following David on Twitter, DCP&C, and his newsletter, and, of course, postandcourier.com. There's a lot more to tell on this story throughout the course of the next few days. Appreciate you on a busy day, sir. We'll talk soon.
No problem, guys. Thanks for having me.
That's David Cloninger. Want to come back to some of those names. One of them I might not classify as home run hire. The others, I think, could be. We'll get into that. Want to hear from you guys as well. You're listening to the Postgame Show. Welcome back into the Postgame Show on this Monday afternoon. Jay Phillips, Elijah Campbell with you. Thanks to David Cloninger for joining us as we talk all things Carolina baseball. The season is done. Gamecocks eliminated from the NCAA tournament by James Madison yesterday afternoon, 2-0. JMU went on to lose to NC State. The Pack are on to the Supers. We got 5 games being played today. One of them is in the books. Evansville came from behind to beat East Carolina in Greenville, 6-5, the final score for the Flying Purple Aces. They now head on to Knoxville to take on Tennessee. So Cliff Godwin is now free to discuss his future. He, of course, has been at ECU a long time. He went to ECU. They make the regionals a lot. They've hosted a bunch. Carolina won a regional there a few years ago under Mark Kingston. But they don't advance. Cliff, though, is a good coach. He was basically down to him and Jay Johnson at LSU a few years ago. They hired Jay, and, of course, he's gone on to win a national championship. David Cloninger telling us, my list, a little different than David's. Tom Walter and Chris Pollard are at the top of my list, and I could really go 1A, 1B. Dan McDonnell is a South Carolinian. He played at the Citadel back when they went to the College World Series. He's taken Louisville to the College World Series 4 times, but of late, it's maybe dipped a little. Chris Lemonis is from Myrtle Beach. He played at the Citadel. He's won at Mississippi State, but I don't think State's going to let him go. He's another guy on my list. I like Skylar Meade. But Skylar Meade isn't really, in my opinion, any different than hiring Mark Kingston. It's what David said about Landon Powell. If Landon didn't go to Carolina, nobody around here would care. It's not that you're being disrespectful, but nobody would care. But there's the lure of the alum. I told you earlier, I liken, there's a difference, of course. Again, Landon played here. But it's not a lot different, in my opinion, Elijah, than when Carolina fans a few years ago were saying they wanted Jamie Chadwell to be the head coach when Jamie was doing good things down at Coastal. But the fact of the matter was, Jamie Chadwell had never spent a day in his professional life coaching, working, learning at any Power 5 school, not just in the SEC, any Power 5 job. Is he a good football coach? Yeah. Could you have hired Shane and then said, hey, Shane, I'll give you $1 million to go hire Jamie for a couple of years as your OC? I might have done that. Yeah. But running a Southeastern Conference program when you've never spent a day even working at this level, that's hard. And again, how many of you want to take that risk right now? Like
this
David
juncture
said.
In your program's history, yeah. And
that's why I say Skylar, I know Skylar worked here a couple of years. Skylar has played, he played at a big program. He's been around. I get it. I get it. But this time around, are you wanting to roll those particular dice? I think you got to make Walter and Pollard tell you no. And then I think you need to have Dan McDonnell and Chris Lemonis tell you no. I've also heard that Godwin might only leave now if Mike Bianco was out of a job and Cliff could go coach in Oxford.
He's an Ole Miss guy. There's some ties there. And Godwin's going to be hard to take out of ECU because from what I've been told too, he doesn't want to leave unless he gets them to where they've never been. Yeah. Like they're notorious for being the team that's made the most tournaments without ever going to Omaha. From what I understand of him, from what I've been told, that's a guy who wants to finish what he started.
Right.
So it's while I like Godwin, I think Godwin's a really good coach.
I think he's a very good coach.
I think, it feels weird to say you can't pry him from ECU, but I don't see that as a plausibility right now, just because of the personality type of Godwin.
And we're going to get a little more deeply into some of these guys, but you've got a poll question out today that I think is an interesting one in terms of gauging the interest.
Because and this poll question doesn't have any specific candidates. We'll add that later on in the week now that we kind of get to throw some names out there and get some idea of what people want as a head coach. But right now, we just asked, at 107.5 The Game, what type of coach would you like to see the Gamecocks pursue? Would you like a head coach with Omaha experience, a head coach from a rising program, an up-and-coming Power 5 assistant, or a former Gamecock? Overwhelmingly, a head coach with Omaha experience is leading the pack with 72.6% of the vote, which two of the guys that are on the short list, 3 actually, we count Lemonis, that are on this short list, have Omaha experience, one with a national championship.
Yep.
head coach from a rising program at 14.2%, which Godwin would kind of fit into that mold.
And Pollard.
They fit into that mold because Duke and ECU have, before they got there and after they got there, significant improvements.
Pollard especially, man. Duke was, again, did Duke even know they had a baseball team? I'm not so sure.
They don't even know they have a football team half the time.
Right.
I mean, it's basketball. But then, and someone like Skylar Meade could be part of that, rising program, but to a lesser degree, and then becoming P5 assistant. We talked a lot about that, but 14.2% rising program, 8.4% former Gamecock, 4.7% up-and-coming Power 5 assistant.
8% say a former Gamecock, and I guess there's one on the list.
Yeah.
Hour 2 coming up.